Hey guys, Alex here. Today I'm going to show you how to install VMware vSphere 5.5 lab environment running on an ESXi 5.5 host. This makes for excellent practice for those of you who want to learn and understand VMware's virtualization technology, as well as to help you prepare for the VCP 5 exam for those of you who are interested in doing so. The lab that we're going to be utilizing and installing today is called AutoLab and was developed by Alistair Cook and Nick Marshall over at labguides.com. So big thumbs up to those guys for helping us out. So let's go ahead and get started. Just to let you know in advance, some of the prerequisites that you're going to need in order to build this lab environment are going to be a vSphere 5.5 ISO image, which you can obtain over at VMware.com. You'll have to log in and create a login account and register with them in order to download the software, which comes with a 60-day trial. Along with the hypervisor ESXi operating system, you're also going to need the vCenter 5.5 ISO image. Some of the command line utilities that we'll be using are Power CLI, vSphere CLI. We're also going to need SQL Management Studio and a copy of Windows Server 2008 R2, which is what will be used to deploy our virtual center server and our domain controller. For those of you who want to take this a little further and even start building out a VMware View environment, you will also then need a copy of Windows XP Service Pack 3 and a copy of Windows Server 2003 R2 Service Pack 2. XP and 2003 are both optional. They are not needed for the lab, but might as well go ahead and grab yourself a copy of those if you can as well. So let's go ahead and get started. So the first thing you want to do after you've downloaded all the software, you're going to want to take the vSphere 5.5 hypervisor operating system along with the vCenter 5.5 ISO, and you're going to want to extract the contents of both of those ISO images to a folder because the AutoLab does not utilize the actual ISO of those images. It needs to find all the actual contents of the ISO images extracted into a folder. So the first thing you want to do is open up your web browser, and we're going to go to www.labguides.com/AutoLab. When you get to this page here, you'll have to fill in your user information in order to register for a free account on LabGuides in order to download their free software. I've already done that in advance, so I have a tab open here which with the links that it's going to provide in order for you to download the appropriate version of the AutoLab that you want to install in your environment. The AutoLab is supported on VMware's Workstation platform. It does only say Workstation 8 on here, but I have confirmed and tested it works on the newer versions, version 9 and 10. A nested ESX environment running on an actual ESXi host with and without DRS, which is Distributed Resource Scheduler. And it's also supported on VMware's Fusion application, which is designed for Macintosh computers. So the first thing you want to do here actually is just download the deployment guide PDF. And this is going to contain all of the information that you're going to need in order to tell you how to build your lab environment, what your prerequisites are, and it's a full step-by-step guide on written documentation on how to deploy an AutoLab scenario depending on which platform you're deploying this lab onto. In our case, we are downloading and installing the nested AutoLab on vSphere 5 ESXi with DRS Distributed Resource Scheduler. So I've already gone ahead and downloaded this in advance as well and placed that over on my C drive, on the root of my C drive in a folder called AutoLab, which we can find right here. So if I go ahead and view the contents of this, the guys who developed this AutoLab have exported the entire virtual appliance. They built all these machines and then moved them together into a virtual appliance and exported that out to an OVF file. So all of these VMDKs here are actually the disk image files for the virtual machines, and all these FLPs are the floppy disk images that contain all the unattended files which are used in order to deploy all of the systems that are going to be used in the lab. So this OVF is what we're actually going to deploy in our vCenter environment to deploy this AutoLab. So the first thing you want to do is go ahead and then get connected to your ESXi host. In this case, I am already connected here to my ESXi 5.5 build number 2068190, which is referencing update 2. This was released back in September last month of 2014. So the first thing you want to do here, we're going to click on our host. We're going to have to set up some networking configurations first. So we'll go over here to configuration. We'll go ahead and click on networking. And I've already done this step for you, but I'm just going to go ahead and do like another little dummy switch just to show you exactly what the steps would be. So this first switch that's here is the one that's here by default. This is the one that's connected to our local network and to the host. So what we want to actually do here is go ahead and go to add networking over here on the upper right hand corner. So we'll click on that, and the first thing we want to do is actually add a VM kernel port. This VM kernel port is what's going to be used for the AutoLab in order to connect our NAS virtual machine through the router to our local computer so that we can copy the files that we've downloaded in order to be used for the lab directly into that NAS virtual machine. So we'll go ahead here and click next. We're going to create a new vSwitch. Okay, and the label that it's going to be looking for the VM kernel, we'll just call this lab net. And the VLAN ID, we have to select all 4095. It's already telling me that there is a label with that, so I'm just going to choose another name real quick, but the one that you have to use is going to be lab net. So that'll let me proceed. Go here and give this an address of 192.168.199.99. Subnet mask is a /24 CIDR notation, so that's 255.255.255.0. And we keep the stock gateway that it keeps in there. Go ahead and click next. That's also going to let us know that that's assigned to another switch. So in this case, I'm just going to change this to 100. I'm going to be deleting this anyway once we fire up our real lab environment. So this here, we can see that there are no network adapters attached to this switch. That is because this lab environment on an ESXi host does not need a direct network adapter connected to it. All the machines will be able to communicate amongst one another within this same switch here without any networking to the outside. The router, the virtual router that is configured and deployed during the deployment setup will be able to connect through DHCP to your local network in order for you to access your build share. So here's just a summary here letting us know that we're going to go ahead and finish. And we can see here now that that has created another switch. Now inside of this switch, we're going to want to go here then to properties. We'll do add virtual machine network. And the virtual machine network we're going to want to call lab_local. In my case, I'm just going to add a 2 at the end of it as well, just so that it doesn't give me any errors. This here also we're going to put all 4095. LabNet 2, actually, you could just leave the default. It doesn't have to have an ID. So I can actually go back and change that. So it's the virtual machine port group is the one that needs to be set to all 4095. Okay, and lastly, we want to go over to the switch itself, edit the switch, and in order to be able to run nested ESXi hosts in one host, we need to go over to security and turn on promiscuous mode. Okay, now we can see that promiscuous mode has been set to accept, so I'll go ahead and click close. And now we can see that our new switch is set up here exactly how we want it. I'm going to actually wind up removing this now because I already have my switch here set up, and we can see that I have my machines already set up on there. So I'll go ahead here and just click remove switch 2. And now that is gone. Alright, so next what we want to do then is click on the host, and we're going to go up here and go to File, Deploy OVF Template. And from here, what we're going to do is navigate over to that OVF file that I explained earlier before, which I downloaded on the root of my C drive in the AutoLab folder, AutoLab OVF. We'll go ahead here and open, click next. And this here is just letting us know the details of the download size of that file and how much size on our hard drive this deployment is going to wind up taking up. If we do a thin provisioned deployment, it will only use about 588 megabytes of storage. If you go ahead and allocate on thick provisioned, it's going to use 379 gigabytes of space because you're allocating all of that disk space right now. You will gain better performance by allocating all of your disk space now, but if you're kind of tight for space, or if you're running off of a solid state drive, which you're kind of limited to in space to begin with, you might want to go with a thin provision deployment and let the virtual machine disk files grow on the fly. So in my case, I'm actually going to deploy this thin provision just so it doesn't use up a lot of space. And as I said, the disks will grow on the fly as they get bigger. So I'll go here. I'm just going to keep the default name of AutoLab. And I created a folder earlier for this just to separate it from my other AutoLab deployment. So I'm going to go here and click on that second folder. Then I'm going to leave it on the root of my ESXi host. These are the two things that you see under here are actually virtual appliances that consist of a bunch of virtual machines inside of them. And then over here, this A-Data drive is my first storage. That's my local boot drive for my ESXi host that is running on a solid-state drive, so I get nice performance. And then I have a Seagate 1 terabyte external or regular hard drive. I'm sorry, an internal hard drive at 7,200 RPMs, which is what I'm going to be using as my actual data store LUN to deploy my my environment. So go ahead and click next. As I mentioned before, we want to change this to thin provision so that it only uses 588 megabytes of storage. And over here we can see the lab networks that we configured earlier when we added our new switch environment for this lab. So we'll go ahead and click next here. This is just giving us our deployment settings and a quick detailed summary of all the options that we selected in order to deploy this lab environment. I'm going to choose not to power on after deployment because it's going to deploy a bunch of extra machines that we're not going to be utilizing in this lab deployment at the moment. So I'm going to actually wind up deleting those machines off of the lab instance and only have the machines that we're going to be using during this deployment. So I'll go ahead and here and click finish. We can see that the task is now running here, deploying our AutoLab. So if I click on this virtual appliance, we can see that here's a bunch of shell VMs that are starting to populate under this. And once this finishes, there's probably list about 10 different virtual machines. I'm going to wind up deleting about half of those and only leave the ones that we're going to be working with in this lab deployment. So this takes us a few minutes just to run. And then as soon as it's done, this message here will let us know that it's been completed. Okay, we can see that that is completed successfully. I'm going to go ahead and close that. And then in order to delete these virtual machines, instead of having to do one by clicking on it and right-clicking and saying delete from disk, if I click up on the root of AutoLab, I can go to the Virtual Machines tab here. And from here, I can select multiple machines by holding the Shift button in order to select a lot of machines and then delete them all in one shot. So here, I'm going to wind up starting off with this Lab vCloud. Oops, I'm sorry about that. Lab vCloud, CS1, VBR, V1. I'm going to delete host 3 because I'm only going to deploy 2 hosts in this lab environment for now. CS2 and SS. So that's going to leave us with our router, our NAS, 2 hosts, a virtual center, and a domain controller virtual machine. So we'll go ahead and right click and say delete from disk. And now we see that those are all cleaned up, looks a lot nicer, and these are the only machines that we're going to be using in this lab deployment. So the first thing that I like to do, all of these machines are actually configured right now with the utmost minimum resources that are needed in order to run this virtual lab. Uh, if you keep the resources as they are, it will build kind of slowly. It's recommended for people who have about 8 gigs of RAM or less to keep the specs that is configured with. If you have at least 16 gigs of RAM in your ESXi host or more, I would definitely recommend bumping up the specs of some of these a little bit just to get a little bit better performance, and also to help build all these lab virtual machines a little bit faster. So to start off, I'm going to go over here to my lab router, and we'll see what this is configured with and then bump this up a little bit. So right now the lab router is configured only with 32 megs of RAM. This doesn't need a lot of RAM to begin with. My ESXi host currently has 32 gigs of RAM available. So I'm actually going to bump this up a little bit. And from 32, I'm just going to go to the default recommended size, which is 256 megabytes. So I'll just bump this bad boy up and help them run a little bit faster. I'm going to do the same over here with my NAS virtual machine, which is configured with 128 megabytes of RAM. So I'm going to go ahead and do the default minimum here as well, give it a 1 gig. Not touching the processors at all because it's just a router and a NAS, network attached storage virtual machine. Next here we'll go to my domain controller. This will be the first virtual machine that we wind up building. So I'll go over here. This is configured with 512 megabytes of RAM. So again, I'll do the default minimum of 2 gigs on this bad boy. That should help that run along pretty nicely since it's just deploying and running my domain controller services. The next VM that we actually wind up building during the lab are going to be your lab hosts. So we'll see what these are configured with. Most likely they're configured with 4 gigs. Yep, 4 gigs of RAM, 2 virtual CPUs. So I think that's actually sufficient for what we need for this lab. So I'm actually just going to leave those as is. Same with host number 2, it'll be configured the same way. My virtual center server is the one that's actually going to need the most resources in order to be able to handle the virtual environment and to be able to manage it appropriately. This one right here is configured only with about 1.5 gigs of RAM. So I'm actually going to bump this up. The default minimum says also 2 gigs, but I would recommend going higher than that. So I'm actually going to give this one about 6 gigs of RAM, just to help it along a little bit better. And ESXi itself as an operating system has really good resource management and power management, so you are able to overcommit your resources quite a bit on your RAM and your virtual CPUs without really causing too much of an impact and strain to your actual RAM and CPU resources on the host. So to kind of put it in a little bit more sense, if you had a regular machine that had about 8 gigs of RAM in a virtual machine, you could run it with like 2 gigs of RAM and it would pretty much be comparable to one another. So we'll go ahead here and click OK. And now we're ready to start kicking off this lab deployment. So the first thing that we want to do here is fire up our router virtual machine. I'll go ahead and open up a console window here as well, just so we can see this thing power on. And this machine powers on fairly quickly, especially since we upped the RAM on it a little bit. Um, what we want to pay attention to here also is right here where it says waiting for DHCP offer on Ethernet 0, which is configured with an internal, or actually my local network address. It's configured with an IP address on my local network using DHCP. You can change that. I'll let you know now. In my personal lab, I have configured this with a static IP address so that it remains consistent even after any type of reboot. When you shut your lab environment down and then you reboot it back up, it will grab a new DHCP address. So if you have any mapped drives that you configured on any of your virtual machines that go to this your NAS virtual machine, which uses your router's DHCP Ethernet 0 address, that'll keep on changing every single time you reboot your machine. So in order to remain consistent across all my labs, I set that with a static IP address. So you would do that actually when the router boots up. Instead of letting it time out the 8 seconds and then booting, you would actually click into the console and then type setup, so it boots in setup mode. And then you'd have to go into the networking properties there and configure static IP address and turn off DHCP. But this is the address that we're going to use in order to access the lab NAS virtual machine from our local computer in order to populate the build shares with all the files that are needed in order to build and run the virtual machines in this lab. So the next thing here we're going to do then, I'll open a console as well for the NAS, power this one on. And this one will take a little bit longer to boot up than it does the router. So we'll just give this one a few moments here to finish booting up. While this is booting up in the meantime, we're gonna have to make sure that your lab domain controller and your lab virtual center server have a 2008 ISO attached to them. So what I actually did was, after I downloaded the Microsoft Server 2008 image from Microsoft, I uploaded that to my data store into a folder called ISO, so that's directly on my data store. So we can actually check that out. If I go back to my host configuration, go here to storage, and then just browse my one LUN here, my terabyte LUN. Browse this data store. I'll see I have an ISOs folder that I created here. And inside of this ISOs folder is where I have extra copies of my vCenter server installer. That's just another ISO for Windows Tech Preview. This ISO here is my Windows Server 2008 image. Right here is just a Windows 8.1 ISO image that I uploaded in case I wanted to build some other virtual machines. But that's also the one that I used to build the machine that we're actually running on right here. So this is a virtual machine that's running on this ESXi host as well. So if I go back here to my host, that's actually under my management. You can see I have this Windows 8.1 machine, my vCenter server, which is what we're logged into here in order to manage this entire environment, and my domain controller for my environment. These are separate. These are all machines that are connected to my local network, whereas these ones here are all connected to a switch that has no external networking, so they only talk amongst one another. So at this point, the lab NAS should be booted up as well, and we can see it provides us with an IP address here of 192.168.199.7. That is how you will access the lab NAS build share from your domain controller or from your lab virtual machine, vCenter machine, if you're on the internal network. Since we're trying to access this lab NAS from my local network, we're actually going to access it using the DHCP address of the router /build in order to get to the build share. So since that's up and running, I'll go over here and let's just say I'll create a shortcut on my desktop. I'm going to close these console windows since I don't need them open. Just keep note that this is 192.168.1.15 is the address we have to access the lab NAS. So let's just right click here, do new shortcut /192.168.1.15 Okay, we can see that it found that just fine, so we'll go ahead and hit finish. And now I have a shortcut here on my desktop. So if I double click on this, this is that lab NAS virtual machine that contains a bunch of folders inside of it. And with these folders, what you want to do is place the extracted contents of your ESXi 5.5 operating system and your vCenter server installation media. Once you've downloaded those ISOs and extracted the files from the ISO, you place and copy all of those files inside of their respective folders. The AutoLab does not utilize those actual ISO images directly. They need to be extracted first and then placed into these folders. So The ones that we're going to be concerned with are going to be this ESXi 5.5 folder, which you can see is empty. This is where the actual ESXi 5 operating system files will be copied into. The other one here is going to be this vim55 folder, and this is for all of the actual vCenter server installation files from that media, which will install vCenter server, the web client, single sign-on, and inventory services. So additionally, what we want to do too here is we're going to go to Automate, and inside of this Automate folder, there's going to be an Automate INI file. So if we go to this file and we just say Edit, I'm going to open it here with Notepad++ just to have a little bit of a better graphical representation of what the file is. If it wants to open. Looks like it might want to crash in that app real quick, so yep. Let's just close that. We'll just open it up then with regular edit. And we can see here that we want to change this here and set your time zone for where you are. So me, I'm actually in Eastern Standard Time. This here is vCenter 55, which is 5.5. That's the version we're going to be installing. We're going to want to change this here to say 55 so that it installs vCenter options for 5.5. If you want to have the scripts automatically add your ESXi hosts to your vCenter server once it has been deployed, you would change this from false to true. Over here for your build data stores, once you have your hosts built and your data stores, this will build your data stores and connect them to your hosts in your environment. This here build VM is for your Windows 2003 virtual machine. As I said before, is optional, but it will build and deploy one of those machines on one of those nested hosts after the deployment has been built. If you do the build options here, select that to true or false if you want it to build that VM or not. Same options here go for view, whether you want it to install or not, which flavor of view you want to be installing. If you're going to build that Windows XP virtual machine, and you provide the key for Windows XP here, and up here you would provide your key for Windows 2003. I've actually already have a file that I'm going to copy into here that has all these settings configured, and I'm going to do a comparison of both my build share that I already have uploaded on here, so I can pretty much transfer all my files over a lot faster and easier instead of sifting through a bunch of different folders on my computer to pull all these files. I just created a build share of my own, populated all the files that I need there, and then I can just do a comparison using a great utility here that I highly recommend called Beyond Compare by Scooter Software, where it'll let you do a folder comparison, file comparison, etc., and copy files back and forth between the two compared folders. If you're using directories, for instance, to compare those two directories, you can copy files back and forth fairly easily, or overwrite files that are already in there if there are matching file names and there might be some data inside of them that are missing or is different. And you'll see that in my case, I'll actually go through some of this stuff. And since I am deploying vCenter 5.5 Update 2, which is the most recent release, I did have to go into some of the scripts that were created and change some stuff around just to kind of make sure that it worked with 5.5 Update 2, since this wasn't designed for that yet. And I've installed this lab a few times already, so through trial and error and seeing what issues came up in the scripts, I was able to go ahead and find those inside of the lines of code and make the necessary adjustments that I had to make. So I'll go ahead and close this here, and I'll close the actual build share itself. And this is my build share right here that I have. You can see it has the same folder structure with the extra files that I have, and there's files inside of these folders and whatnot, which were the extracted contents of the hypervisor and of the vCenter installer. So I'm actually just going to close this and then do a comparison of my folder on the left side to the actual lab NAS virtual machine, which will be on the right hand side. So we can see here that all these folders on the right, they're all pretty much gray because they have no data inside of any of these folders. The ones that I have over here that have color coding on them with red and blue, or just the blue, or even down here, these files, those are actual files that have contents, or folders that have contents inside of them. So another thing too, what you're gonna have to do is, since we're deploying this on an ESXi host, you're gonna have to download the tools that are necessary for ESXi rather than the ones that are used for Workstation, as it mentions in the AutoLab guide PDF. So what I actually did was went to VMware, and I was able to find their VMware tools repository, and found on their FTP site the ISO image that's used for Windows virtual machines inside of ESXi. Found their version of the VMware tools, and I copied that ISO into my VMware tools build share folder. And in here, you have to do the same thing. It's not an ISO file. You'll have to extract the contents of the ISO and then paste all of those files inside of this folder. So over here, we can see that I have some discrepancies on the automate folder, and that's because I've changed some stuff around, or have made changes to some of the scripts and whatnot that are in here. So not all of these folders are going to have changes. Some of these are just hidden files that don't really need to be copied over on the other side. So I'm not worried about those there. Shared shell VMs, don't have to anything to worry about in there. I know the first folder I want to go to is this VC folder, which is going to be our virtual center folder. And as I mentioned before, I had to go into the build script, which is a PowerShell script here, and edit some lines in there in order to make this thing work correctly. So if I go ahead in here, the good thing about this utility is it has this bar over here on the left hand side, and where you see these lines, this red and these blue, that's how you know where that's a line that there's an issue or a discrepancy with the file that I have versus the stock one that was on the build share. So if I go down, let's say, to these first couple lines here, you can see I made a change here. I put a dash and then an asterisk so that it looked for uh, VMware Power CLI on that build share, and then with a build number afterwards. I didn't have to keep any certain build number in there. It would just use a star as the asterisk and would let any version, any build number version of Power CLI work and install in this lab. Down here, I just changed some wording. I saw a little typo, so I just changed the typos around. Nothing really to be concerned with there. Up here, this is when it's installing the vCenter 5.5 single sign-on. I did run into an error where it would say that it had an error processing or installing a DLL file, and this was actually also mentioned in the lab guides support forums, which are very great. I would highly recommend that you read through them if you have any issues on your own. Sometimes people post comments on here on how they were able to resolve stuff. So big shout out to this person here, Martin Renix. He was actually installing 5.5 update 2, ran into the same problem. So he gave his method of getting past this error and what he was able to do to get it to install. Basically what he did was he quit the installation as it was running, quit the PowerShell script, and went to this location here on the vCenter server, and actually in the Vim folder of your build share, and went to the single sign-on directory into this folder and ran these two files manually first, and then went back onto it and reran the script in order to generate and build his virtual center server and install vCenter and whatnot. So in my script that I edited, I actually added 2 extra lines of code here to go ahead and do that process for me, so I didn't have to manually go and install that stuff first and wind up getting, waiting to get an error or anything like that. The script will automatically go to that directory for me, install those 2 files before it even kicks off the job to install the actual single sign-on client. So down here as well too, like I mentioned, I downloaded the Power CLI 5.8, which is the newest version of VMware's Power CLI. This was not actually in his script. You can see here it was calling for Power CLI 5.5. So I just added in some extra lines there, pretty much copied the same script, and then just modified it to reflect 5.5 and 5.8. If I come down here, there was one last one, and this was an issue with the actual Windows XP ISO at the part where it's trying to prep the sysprep files. Once you're done building your virtual center server and your domain controller, you can run a PowerShell script to validate the server and that everything is populated correctly and that everything built correctly. And you will notice that it will give an error saying that Windows XP sysprep file could not be found on the virtual center server. And for some reason, when it's going in there, in order to find that sysprep file, it has to extract this deploy.cad file from within the Windows 2003 and the Windows XP ISO itself. And inside of this deploy.cad file is where the sysprep EXE file is contained. So for some reason, it works fine on the 2003 extract, but when it goes to the Windows XP extract, for some reason it doesn't do it the right way, and that directory winds up being empty, and you'll get the error that it did not find the file. So I actually came in here and forced it to look for the Windows XP ISO like it normally does, but up here it's calling if it sees in that automate any file that it's looking for a Windows XP ISO and it says build view VM is set to true, then it will extract that. If it doesn't see that, then it won't extract it. And like I said, we're having problems with it, so I basically forced this with an else if statement, so that if it finds a Windows XP ISO with build view equals true, or if it just finds a Windows XP ISO in general, it'll go ahead and extract the deploy.cad from the XP ISO support tools directory and place the sysprep file, which you can see here later on in the code, places that sysprep file in the C program data VMware Virtual Center sysprep XP directory. So I'm not going to copy any of this stuff over. I'm just going to do it all at one big shot in a moment. So we come down here to the automate any that I was talking about before, where I showed you that you have to configure some things. I'll make sure that I hide my keys, but here you can see I changed this to Eastern Standard Time. I added this and changed it to 5.5. I set this to true for the build options, provided my keys. And same with down here on the VMware View, I actually set it to none so that it doesn't install VMware View, but maybe we'll build my virtual machine. So we'll go ahead and close this out. And then down here we see another one on the shut lab script. I noticed that when you go and run the script to shut your entire lab down, it actually doesn't power off your router lab VM and your NAS lab VM. With your router, it actually puts it in a halt state, and you'll wind up having to either manually power it down or just reset it in order to clear that. And for the NAS, it actually just reboots it rather than powering it off. So I actually just changed the line of code in here just to kind of comment out that part of the script so that it doesn't even touch those two VMs, and then I'll go in there and just manually shut them down on my own. So I don't have to show you that. It's just a quick rem out statement, comment out, which is in PowerShell is done with a hashtag. So those are all the files in that were changed. In here we can see this is my ESXi 5.5 directory, which is the actual ESXi ISO operating system files that were extracted and placed into that folder. And same down here with the Vim. This is the VMA, I'm sorry. The Vim folder, where I took the vCenter server media, extracted all the contents, and placed it in that folder. The other files that I said you'll need are going to be placed right on the root directory, and that'll be the SQL Management Studio, your VMware Power CLI. The VI client is not needed. I actually just put that there just in case I needed it for any particular reason. Your vSphere CLI, and then your Windows 2003 ISO and your Windows XP ISO. When you download the Power CLI applications, be sure to rename them and take the build number off of the end of it so that it just winds up saying VMware Power CLI.exe and VMware vSphere-CLI.exe. This one wound up actually just getting renamed again. Something in the script looks for Power CLI and then renames it back to what it originally was with the build number. So I don't know why it was recommended to remove that from there when it's just going to wind up putting it back, but it only happens on the VMware Power CLI, and it doesn't cause any effect or problems with deploying your lab environment. So I'm going to go ahead then and set all of this stuff to copy over, since I need everything that's in this directory, my build share, to be copied over onto this other side. So I'll go ahead and just highlight all of these files and click this right arrow here that's going to say copy to the right. This is going to take about 5 to 10 minutes to copy. So I'm going to pause the video while that's copying, and I'll be back afterwards. Hey guys, and we're back. We can see here now that the copy has completed. Both folders, my build share and the current build share on the new NAS virtual machine, match identically. All files have been copied over from left to right. So now our NAS build virtual machine is fully populated with all the files that we're going to need in order to successfully run this AutoLab deployment. So go ahead here, and I'm just going to close this window out. And we're going to get ready to fire off the installation of our domain controller server in our lab. So earlier I had reconfigured this lab domain controller with only 2 gigs of RAM. I'm actually going to bump that up 2 more gigs and give it 4 gigs, just so that it helps to install the virtual machine a little bit faster. And then once everything is said and done, I can go ahead and shut this machine down and go ahead and just reduce the resources that I gave it back down to 2 gigs and power him back on. He'll be all set. I did notice that both the domain controller and the virtual center server were configured incorrectly with the wrong operating system. They do say Windows 7 64-bit, when in fact they both will be running Windows Server 2008 R2, which is 64-bit operating system. So I'm going to go ahead and fix that setting as well. We're going to then mount our ISO, which is saved on our data store, which is our 2008 server ISO. And once everything is said and done and the entire environment is built, we do see here that this was configured with the VMware hardware version 8, which was for ESXi 5.0. So I can kick off a compatibility upgrade afterwards, which will then upgrade this to virtual machine hardware 10, and then the entire infrastructure, the entire lab will be current on the current hardware. So let's go ahead and edit our settings here. We'll first change our RAM, bump this up to 4 gigs. We'll go ahead here to our CD-ROM drive, and we're going to select a data store. We're going to browse our data store and go to the ISOs folder where I uploaded my 2008 R2 server installation. So go ahead and click on that, and we'll do connect that power on. Then I'd like to go into the options here as well. We're going to fix this operating system version and change it from Windows 7 to Windows Server 2008 R2. And a couple optional things that I like to do is go over here to memory and CPU hot plug and enable memory hot add and CPU hot plug. Then I like to go to the boot options here and just give it a 5-second runoff from when it starts the machine, just in case you have to access the BIOS or change your boot order, and boot a different device first. So we'll just go ahead here. This is in milliseconds, so I have to add 5,000 for 5 seconds. And we're going to force the BIOS setup on the initial boot. I'll go ahead and click OK. And that will reconfigure the machine. We're going to go ahead and do the same thing here with the Lab Virtual Center server, just so that I don't forget. Okay, now that those are both fully reconfigured, I can go ahead here and kick off the installation of the Lab Data Center virtual machine first. It is fully automated. It does read in an unattended installation file, which will configure everything to spec as needed. So I'll just go ahead here and open up a console window. Let's bring this down over here. We'll go ahead and press start to power it on. And we should first be presented with our BIOS, since I configured it to boot to the BIOS first. We'll go ahead here and change the system time. I'm currently in Eastern Standard Time. Usually these BIOSes are always configured a little bit further ahead for some reason. So I'm going to change the time here. It's actually 8, almost 9 o'clock in the morning. And then I'll go to boot, and I want to go and select the CD-ROM drive to boot first. So I'll move that up to the top. Go ahead and go to exit, hit yes to save our changes. Then I'll reboot, and here you can see our 5-second runoff, and then the installation should just start. So this install does take roughly about a half an hour or so to complete from end to end. So we're just going to go ahead and let this thing run, and then I'll be back as soon as this finishes, and we'll continue on with the next virtual machine in our environment. Okay guys, and we're back. We can see that the domain controller server has finished installing. I just like to go to customize and show all my icons at the bottom there in the taskbar. We can see back here in the actual C# client that it has installed. VMware tools are running and it's current, and it has assigned the address of 192.168.199.4 and is on the dc.lab. This is dc.lab.local is the DNS name on this domain. So we can go here. The first thing we will want to do, we can go ahead here and open up the build log, and that'll show us a written text build log of all the steps that we're taking through the installation, all those scripts that were run that you saw in the command windows. So if you'd like, if you run into any errors or issues, this would be a place to go check to see if it gives you any information on what possibly could have failed during the installation. But in my case, it was a very clean install. Like I said, since I had customized the scripts, etc., to be compatible with vSphere 5.5. And then it said it was going to build was going to be complete after the reboot, and then it's letting me know that a build or a rebuild of the virtual center server would come next. Before we actually do that, though, we're going to wind up kicking off the installations of our ESXi hosts. So before we do that, let's close this out. We'll launch this validation script that's here on the desktop. It's a PowerShell script. And this basically will run a check against the system here to validate that the server was built correctly, successfully, that we didn't have any issues, that the build share was populated and all the correct files that were needed were found. So we can see here that everything is in green and in blue text, letting us know that this was a successful deployment. And you see down here it says build looks good, so go ahead and move on to the next stage. So at this point, I'll just hit enter to close out of that script. And we're going to get ready to kick off the installation of our ESXi hosts 1 and 2. So let's just take a quick break, and we'll be back shortly to kick off the next part of this video. Hey guys, welcome back. At this point in the video, we're going to go ahead and kick off the installation of our ESXi hosts. As I mentioned, we're only deploying 2 of them in this AutoLab just to kind of help keep the resources that are being used down to a minimum. So the lab hosts, actually, since those are using the files that we extracted from our operating system ISO and place those files into a folder, we can actually kick the 2 of these hosts off concurrently and let them build at the same time. So that'll help us save some time in the deployment. So I'm going to go ahead here and open up a console window to both host 1 and to host 2. And we don't have to do any additional configurations to the virtual machine settings. It has the correct media already attached. And as I said, it goes ahead and it reads the files that we populated on the build share in those Vim55 and ESXi 5.5 directories to use for the deployment. Okay, so go here and I'll open up a console window to this machine as well. So here's 1 and 2. Spread these out just a little bit here, since the windows will enlarge a little bit once you press play to power them on. And these will do a Pixie boot, and then you will select an automated installation. So we're going to go here when you power it on. Be sure to go down to ESXi 5.5 automated builds. So we'll click on that. Let's do the same in the other VM just to kick them off at the same time here. Okay, and on the first one here, we're going to select host 1 automated install. And on the second one, obviously we'll do host 2 automated install. So we'll go ahead here and hit enter to kick this one off. We'll let that start. And I'll do the same over here on the second one. Hit enter, and now both of them are installing at the same time. The ESXi hosts don't take as long to build, especially with the resources that are given to them, since it's just a small footprint for the operating system, and they're both configured with 4 gigs of RAM and 2 virtual processors. So it'll take probably about 10 minutes or so to build both of the ESXi hosts. So we'll just let this video run and the installations run, and we'll be back as soon as it's finished. Okay, guys, we can see that both hosts have finished installing. So they're going to go ahead and reboot automatically. You can go ahead and press enter if you want to go ahead and kick that off manually yourself. I just let it wait, and it automatically rebooted on its own. So we'll just give this a few moments to get powered back on. Okay, and both hosts now are online. We can see that it was assigned the DNS name of host 1 and host 2, and the IP address is 192.168.199.11 and 12, which are on the internal network for that lab environment on that switch. So at this point, both of the ESXi hosts are built and up and running. So we'll just go ahead and close the console windows here. And now we can see the remaining virtual machine that we need to build is going to be our lab virtual center server, which will run through the same automated process. It will build and configure automatically. And then once it's done, we'll go ahead and do some final installation scripts that we'll kick off in order to add our hosts into a cluster in Virtual Center. There's a script that does that automatically. There's another script we can run that's going to set a static route for vSphere Update Manager so that you can update your hosts when new updates and patches are released. So we're going to go ahead here and get ready to kick off this Lab Virtual Center server. First, let's take a quick short break, and we'll be back soon. Hey guys, welcome back. At this point, we're at the final stages of the AutoLab deployment, where we will be building our vCenter 5.5 virtual machine. This is the server that will be used to manage the nested virtual infrastructure that we've been deploying in this AutoLab. And since we already pre-configured this machine earlier, I simply just have to open up a console window and power on the virtual machine to start the unattended installation. This installation will take roughly about an hour to an hour and 15 minutes to complete, depending on how much memory and CPU you were able to give to this virtual machine. So at this point, I'll just let the installation run, and we'll be back soon. Hey guys, we're back. I did have to pause the video momentarily and step out for a little bit, so I am back now and I want to go ahead and finish up with the rest of the AutoLab deployment. We can see here that the Virtual Center server has finished its installation and configuration and has rebooted. We see these icons here that were populated onto the desktop. So we want to go ahead here and run the AutoLab script menu, which is a PowerShell script, to run our validation check against this server build. So we'll go ahead here and input option number 1. And just make sure that everything did pass successfully. And we can see here that everything looks like it built good. Sysprep files have been found. All the services have been checked and are running. It did go ahead and make the automated installation ISO files that will be used for the view environment if you do decide to deploy a view environment. So everything here looks good, so we're going to go ahead and just hit enter to exit out. We'll go ahead and open up the build log just to have a quick glance at that. So these are all the notes that were written into the build log here for this installation, and we can see that there were no any errors listed in this build log, so we should be all set. So next we want to do here is actually go ahead and click on the option number 3, which is to add our ESXi host to the vCenter environment and configure the cluster inside of Virtual Center. So we'll go ahead and hit option number 3, and it'll kick off a script which will then go ahead and take care of that for us. Okay, we can see that the installation has finished running its scripts. I did notice a PowerShell error that came up before when that script is running, but that can be disregarded as that's just looking for the XP key information in order for it to build that XP VM machine inside of the nested lab environment. So we can safely ignore that one, not really worry about it. The last thing then we want to go ahead and do here is select option number 4, which is to add a route to the internet so that VUM can download updates. That's if you decide to install the vSphere Update Manager plugin inside a virtual center. Then you can go ahead and download any new updates that will be released in the future after update 2 for patches, ESXi host upgrades, VMware patches and upgrades for the actual virtual machines, etc. Okay, and at this point, we are all done with the AutoLab setup. So stay tuned for the next video, and I'll go ahead and show you how to log into the vCenter server using your vSphere client, as well as with the web client interface. Hey guys, welcome back. For the final video in this AutoLab deployment, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to access the vSphere environment using the vSphere client as well as with the web client interface. So first off, what I'm actually going to do here is go ahead and test my RDP connection into this VM, so then I don't have to use this small web console that we've been using this entire time. So I'm just going to go ahead and minimize this out, or actually close this out, and we're going to open up a remote desktop session here. Now, in order to get to the lab virtual machine and the lab data center machine, you're actually going to use the DHCP offer address that the router gives out, same way we access the NAS build share earlier in the videos. So if we go over here to the lab router, just go ahead and click on the console here just to view. Okay, we can see here that the address that's giving off is 192.168.1.15, which is still consistent in the lab deployment that we've been doing since we started. So what we'll want to do for RDP access then is actually type in that same address with port 3389 and 3388 for the domain controller. So in this case, I'm going to change this here to 1.15. I don't have to put the port number in for 3389 as it is the default RDP port, but just for good measure, I'm going to go ahead and do so. 3389. And this is going to let me connect here. It's wanting to use my login information that I'm currently used to log into my Windows 8 virtual machine right here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on use another account. And here first what I'm going to do is attempt to log in with the VI admin account, which is the local administrator account that was used during the setup for the AutoLab and has been pre-configured on all of these machines. So in order to get to that, actually we have to do lab / because we want to connect to the VI admin AV account, which is on the lab.local domain. And the password for this was VMware one bang. It's going to give me a quick little certificate security message. I'll just prompt this not to ask me again for the connections to this computer. And voila, we're accessing the exact same lab virtual center machine using remote desktop connection on Windows. So from this point here, we can go ahead and open up the vSphere client. Now, there was a script that was run during the setup which posted these icons on here for the vSphere client, as well as one that's just called vSphere. And if you actually double click on this one, it's going to attempt to log in with some pre-populated information that was put into this icon. We can see here it's trying to log us in as lab VI admin. So we need to go ahead here and install the certificate, or else we'll keep getting this warning, and then just click on ignore. And as I expected, this was going to error out, letting us know that we did not have permissions to log on to this virtual center server yet. And that is because the permissions had not been granted to the VI admin account to be able to log into Virtual Center. So what we actually have to do here is log in as the administrator at vSphere.local account. And I know I've actually found what the credentials are by sifting through the PowerShell scripts. But if we go back over here to the internet, to the lab guides forums, the AutoLab support, shout out to this guy here, Mike D. He came across the same issue and was able to obtain the username and password from another guy's YouTube video doing an AutoLab series as well. And the login information, as I mentioned before, was administrator at vSphere.local, and the password for that is actually VMware1.lab. So we'll go ahead back here and we'll go into the C# client, vSphere client. We'll type in administrator at vSphere.local, and with the password that we said before, VMware1.lab. And now we can see it's discovering plugins and whatnot, so it's going to let us log in and let us know here that we have a 60-day evaluation period where you can run this software unlicensed and have full features utilizing the Enterprise Plus edition of Virtual Center for 60 days to try it out and evaluate the software and see if that's the right version that you want to use for your environment. After the 60 days expires, then it will require that you add a license to the license server and license both your Virtual Center server as well as your ESXi hosts. So I'll just click OK to the message here, click the checkbox to install the certificate, and ignore the warning. So now we are successfully logged into our vCenter server using the vSphere client. And I also want to show you how to access this through the web client. So they did actually give us a link here that they populated onto the Virtual Center server, which is an AutoLab portal. So if you double click on that, it should open up a portal window here, and there is a link directly to the vSphere client. So if we click on that, we can see here it is connecting to DNS name vc.lab.local port 9443/vSphere client, and that is to access the web client. It will give us a security certificate warning, so we actually going to go here and click on continue to this website, even though it says not recommended, and that will load the VMware web client. For now, I can actually close this other link out in the background, and if I ever need to reopen it, I can just double click on the AutoLab portal. So during the installation, it did go ahead and download the client integration plugin, which is used for when you want to use your Windows session authentication and use your local account credentials to log into the server. At this point, we still don't have access to our Active Directory domain account, which was the VI admin account. So same thing here, if I want to log in, I have to use the administrator at vSphere.local account. It should just take a minute to initialize and then finally let us log into the web-based client. And we can see here now we're logged into the web client of our vCenter server. So you have two options. I would recommend getting familiar with using this web client, as a lot of the newer features in ESXi with the vSphere client are actually utilized inside of the web client rather than the FAT client or C# client like I've been mentioning before. One of the things that you will still need to use the vSphere client for is for Update Manager, as that is not currently compatible with the web client at this moment. Hopefully in a future release, if there's a vSphere 5.5 Update 3, or sometime next year when they release the new vSphere 6 platform, they might add that functionality back into the web client for you to manage Update Manager. So in order to install the plugin, since we already installed Update Manager, we need to go here to Manage Plugins. And we'll see that it actually has already been enabled for us, so it must have done that during one of the scripts. So we can see here that the vSphere Update Manager is indeed installed and it is enabled. So if we were to go into our hosts and clusters view, for instance, we do see an Update Manager tab here right at the root level of our vCenter server. And you should also see it, at each other level, your data center, your cluster level right here will show it to you as well. And if we drill down even further, we can see here's our 2 lab hosts that we had deployed earlier. And this is the Windows 2003 template machine that I told it to kick off in the automate any file. If we go over to the web client, we can also see the same information here by clicking on vCenter. And then we can navigate down here to virtual machines, and we'll see those same 2 machines listed here as well. We can also go to hosts and clusters view, and it'll show us the same tree layout, which we can go ahead and expand out and see the same thing. Our virtual center server, our data center, our cluster of hosts, the 2 hosts that make up the cluster, and the machines that are currently running on those hosts in that cluster. And then from here you can do all your management stuff, look at summary of your environment, see the resources that are being used currently on CPU usage, memory usage, storage usage in this environment. So we'll just go ahead and minimize that. Go back over here to the C# client. And this as well too, if you go into the summary tab, would pretty much show you the same information at each level that you go down. So we go here at the cluster level, we can see what our resources are, all our data stores that are attached, so on and so forth. So that's about it for this AutoLab deployment. I hope you've enjoyed my video and this quick tutorial. Not really so quick. This was about a good 2-hour video or so. I did tend to shorten the video down by fast forwarding through a lot of the installations and whatnot, just to not be sitting here, twiddling our thumbs while we're waiting for the installations to take place. Feel free to please show your support and hit that like button down there at the bottom. I will be providing links as well to the lab guides and to VMware.com for you to be able to download the lab guide and the ISOs and whatnot that you're going to need to deploy this build. Thanks again for watching, and please show your support by clicking the like button, and I look forward to bringing you some more content soon. Thanks and take care.